They shoved her into the dirt, laughed while she hit the ground. Dust on her cheek, mud on her sleeve, no rank on her uniform to protect her, no backup to step in, just four cadets standing over a woman they thought didn't belong. But what they didn't know was that Navy SEALs don't need rank patches to command a room, because she didn't come here to prove anything. She came to observe until they forced her hand, and when she stood back up, she taught them a lesson they'd never forget about what real combat looks like when you push someone who's already survived worse. Before we show you how Lieutenant Commander Arden Holt turned a training yard into a masterclass in discipline, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because this wasn't a story about getting knocked down. It was about what happens when you underestimate silence. The rain had quit an hour before, but the gravel lot still held water. Boot prints turned into shallow craters. Puddles caught the gray afternoon light and threw it back cold. Wind moved through the backfield of the Academy's training grounds, threading past climbing rigs and obstacle lanes still slick with mud. Cadets in sweat-darkened fatigues ran shuttle drills between stations, barking orders at each other with the kind of urgency only recruits could pull off. A whistle cut sharp through the noise. The supervising sergeant shouted times from somewhere near the rope tower. "You're not racing each other. You're racing what kills you in real combat." Near the far pull-up rig, under the shadow of a decommissioned observation tower, a woman stood alone. She was older than the cadets, mid to late 30s maybe. Her uniform didn't match theirs. Contractor-grade fatigues, tan boots, black undershirt, no insignia, no rank tab, just a clipboard tucked under one arm, a pair of black gloves looped through a carabiner on her belt, and a folded ball cap in one hand. She didn't speak, didn't pace, didn't take notes. She just watched. And the cadets noticed. "Who's the civvy?" one muttered, barely hiding the smirk. "Probably some logistics paper pusher. Saw her near the admin building this morning. She's been standing there for half an hour, like she's waiting for someone to pick her up." A pair of younger recruits jogged past her on cooldown, slowing just enough to get a look. Not enough to get called out for slacking, but enough. "She doesn't belong here," one said under his breath. "Not quite low enough." The woman didn't react. Her eyes moved slowly across the training yard. Calm, scanning, detached. Another cadet cut closer than necessary as he jogged by, his boot deliberately landing just beside her foot. Muddy water splashed up her pant leg to the shin. A few snickers followed. Still no reaction. She looked down briefly, then back at the course. It didn't take long for the whispers to build. "Lost, ma'am? You sure this isn't the PX? Careful, the mud's deeper than it looks. Wouldn't want you to twist an ankle." A larger group near the monkey bars took notice. One of them, stocky, blonde buzz cut, the kind of smirk that had gotten him out of high school fights, stepped toward her. "You with maintenance or something?" he asked, grinning. "If you're here to take inventory, I think we lost a dumbbell or two over by the range." Still, she said nothing. He waited, then chuckled and turned back toward his buddies. "Guess not." She moved away from the tower, pacing slowly down the dirt path that cut between the rig lanes. Her steps were steady, too quiet for someone wearing military boots. She passed two more cadets, loitering near the low crawl tunnel. One stuck a foot out, just slightly. Her boot caught it. Her balance tipped. She stumbled, not hard, but enough to drop one knee into the damp gravel. Dust and dirt coated the fabric instantly. A half snort came from behind her. "Oops! Didn't see you there." She didn't respond, just rose. Calmly brushed her pant leg with one gloved hand. The dust smeared, streaking the beige fabric darker. Then she turned her head, not all the way. Just enough that one sharp eye met his. For a single second, the cadet froze. Her stare wasn't angry, wasn't even irritated, but it landed like a blade pressed against skin. Not slicing, just resting. Enough to know it could cut. Then she turned away, walking on toward the pull-up rigs. Behind her, the whispers grew quieter, but the disrespect hadn't ended. Not yet. And for four cadets, watching from the center of the lot, still laughing, still convinced she was just another soft civilian with mud on her boots. That silence wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. The drills dragged on, cadets hauling themselves across monkey bars slick with condensation, some collapsing in the mud. Others puffing up their chests for the instructors. Whistles cut sharp through the haze, but on the far end of the yard, the sergeant's attention had drifted. He leaned against a post, scribbling in a notebook, leaving the pack to its own discipline. That's when 4 cadets split off. They weren't the strongest or fastest, but they moved with the swagger of boys who mistook loud talk for respect. One of them, the stocky blonde who had smirked earlier, pointed toward the woman by the rig lane. His buddies followed. "She's still here?" "Probably waiting for her carpool." The third, wiry and sharp-featured, chuckled. "Nah, she's watching like she owns the place. Let's fix that." They drifted toward her, slow enough not to raise suspicion, fast enough to corner. The mud clung to their boots in thick cakes as they spread out, flanking her near the pull-up rigs. Up close, she was smaller than they expected, leaner, the kind of frame they thought they could push around. "Afternoon, ma'am," the stocky one said, exaggerating the courtesy. "You lost? This isn't the admin block." She didn't answer, just shifted her weight slightly, one hand resting near her hip, eyes fixed on the rig ahead. "You hear me?" he pressed, stepping closer. "This is the warrior's yard, not a place for... what do you even... logistics?" One of the others snorted. "Doesn't matter. She doesn't belong." The woman's silence felt deliberate, like a wall they couldn't quite scale. It only stoked their bravado. The wiry cadet leaned forward, voice dripping mockery. "Hey, careful, fellas. She might take notes on us." That drew laughter, sharp, ugly. Then the moment tipped. The stocky cadet shoved her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't playful. Both hands on her shoulder, sudden force, driving her straight down into the dirt. She hit hard. Gravel scraped her palms. Mud streaked across her sleeve and cheek. For a beat, the yard seemed to echo with nothing but her fall. Then the laughter came. Loud, coarse, unrestrained. "Damn, look at her, right in the mud. Should have brought a mop. Bet she's regretting walking onto this field now." Across the yard, the supervising sergeant glanced over. His eyes narrowed, but only briefly. He turned back to his notebook, deliberately ignoring it. Cadet games, he told himself. They'd sort it out. The woman lay still for a moment, one hand pressed to the dirt. Her fingers brushed against something half buried in the gravel. A training roster, mud-soaked and trampled. She caught a glimpse of the header before it disintegrated. Asterisk Advanced Close Quarters Combat. Instructor certification required. She'd been sent here to observe instructor qualifications, to assess whether this academy's combat training met the standards Joint Command had been questioning for months. The cadets didn't know that. The sergeant pretending not to watch didn't know that. But she did, and now she had her answer. Then, slowly, she rose. No curse, no accusation, just the quiet brushing of mud from her uniform, as though she had all the time in the world. Her eyes lifted, locking on the 4 cadets. "You should be careful what you think you know," she said, voice low, even. The words weren't a threat, not even a challenge, but something in the calmness unsettled them more than if she had shouted. The cadets smirked anyway, mistaking restraint for fear. "Did you hear that?" The wiry one chuckled. "She's warning us." "Cute. She's lucky we're not supposed to rough up civilians." Their laughter rose again, but the edges sounded thinner this time, less certain. She didn't flinch, didn't move to leave. She just stood there, dirt on her sleeve, mud on her cheek, eyes steady. And the cadets, blinded by arrogance, convinced themselves they'd won. What they didn't realize was that they had just set the stage for their own humiliation. The yard had slowed. Cadets who were supposed to be counting pull-ups or timing sprints had drifted closer, their boots scuffing into a half circle around the rigs. It wasn't an official formation. No whistle, no barked order, just the magnetism of tension pulling everyone inward. The 4 cadets who'd shoved her into the dirt stood at the center, still laughing, though now their voices carried harder, straining to convince themselves the moment was a joke. "Come on, ma'am," one jeered, brushing invisible dust off his sleeve in imitation. Show us a regulation push-up, or is it yoga day? Snickers rippled through the circle. Another cadet chimed in, voice pitched louder to reach the watching crowd. Bet she's never even held a rifle. Logistics doesn't count as combat. The wiry one leaned in, smirk curling. Maybe she can show us how to stack crates. That earned laughter, sharper this time, the kind that turned a crowd into an audience. But the woman didn't look at them. She didn't look at the circle forming around her. Her gaze dropped briefly to their stances, to the way the stocky one's weight was too far forward on his heels, to the wiry one's fists clenching unevenly, to the way the tallest of them had his feet spread too wide, telegraphing every move before it could happen. She didn't need to say anything. The flaws stood out to her like cracks in glass. But the cadets read her silence differently. She's scared, the tall one muttered, loud enough for the circle to hear. Can't even look us in the eye, the wiry one added. The stocky one grinned, taking a step closer. Hey, don't worry, we'll go easy on you. You can tap out when you've had enough. The crowd murmured, some amused, some uncertain. A few cadets shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the line being crossed, but no one stepped forward. The sergeant at the far end of the yard kept his head down, letting it play out. The woman's breathing remained even. Her hands relaxed at her sides, though her eyes flicked once, just once, to the dirt, still clinging to her sleeve. And in that silence, something changed. She remembered another yard. Not this academy's, but the wet sand at Coronado. Second week of Buddy S. Cold surf pounding against her ribs, instructors screaming until their voices broke. She remembered lying in the mud pit, classmates cursing her under their breath, daring her to quit, to ring the bell. The lesson had been sharp and unforgettable. The loudest ones are always the weakest. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The wiry cadet mistook that for victory. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? He stepped in closer, close enough that the circle hushed, waiting for her response. She gave none. Her silence hung heavier than a shouted challenge, and for a flicker of a second, it unnerved him. He shifted back on his heels, then forced a laugh to cover it. The others closed in, their shadows stretching across her boots in the late afternoon sun. What began as a shove in the dirt was turning into something more dangerous now, not just a joke at a civilian's expense, but a confrontation. The air carried it. Every cadet in the circle could feel it. The laughter had thinned, replaced by the sharp anticipation of a fight that hadn't yet begun. And through it all, the woman stood still, mud on her sleeve, calm in her stance, eyes unreadable. The only warning she gave was the kind that went unnoticed, the kind that comes in silence. One of them stepped too close. The tall cadet, irritated that she hadn't broken yet, hadn't flinched, hadn't risen to the bait, reached out and grabbed her sleeve, just a fistful of fabric at the elbow, like you'd tug a stubborn teammate back into line. But it was the kind of contact that shifted things. It wasn't verbal anymore. It wasn't teasing. It was force. And in the space between his hand clenching and the second breath that followed, everything changed. She moved, not fast like a reaction, fast like muscle memory. Her left arm dropped. Her right foot pivoted back. Her center rotated in one smooth motion, and suddenly the tall cadet's wrist was locked, twisted, driven downward into his own weight. He hit the ground hard. Breath knocked from his chest. One knee in the dirt, the other leg extended uselessly behind him. Her grip was tight but controlled. No breaks, no yanks, just precision. A beat passed. Gasps rippled through the cadets watching. Boots shuffled back, quickly. She released him as fast as she'd locked him. He stayed down for a moment, stunned. The woman stepped back, hands lowered but steady, posture relaxed as if she'd merely adjusted her footing. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Too calm. Walk away, she said evenly, before you embarrass yourselves further. The cadet on the ground scrambled up, his cheeks redder than his uniform. His eyes flashed. Not with pain, but something worse. Humiliation. Rage that he hadn't seen it coming. Rage that she hadn't even tried hard. One of the others, the stocky one, looked between his friend and the woman, his hands curled into fists. "No," he said, stepping forward. "You don't get to do that and walk away." She didn't move. The wiry one chimed in. "Think you're tough? You're just fast. That was luck." His voice cracked slightly at the end. Still, they moved. All three now, pride wounded, crowd thickening. Even cadets who'd been unsure before were pressing inward, watching with held breath. Some looked concerned, but no one interfered. That was the way of it. The threshold between test and spectacle. The woman gave no signal, no shift in stance, no threat. But something in her eyes changed. Not aggression, just readiness. She looked at the space between them, the ground where she'd been shoved, the dust still clinging to her sleeve, and didn't see it as shame anymore. She saw it as a line. Cross it and find out. The cadets didn't see it. They stepped forward, and that's when it began. The first one lunged. It was the stocky cadet, the one who'd pushed her earlier. He came in low, trying to grab her around the waist like it was a schoolyard brawl. His boots thudded through the soft dirt, head down, arms wide, too much confidence and not nearly enough control. She didn't move until the last second. Then, with the same terrifying precision she'd used before, she pivoted. His momentum carried him forward into nothing. She stepped aside, hooked his shoulder with one arm, and redirected him into the ground. Not a throw, a correction. He landed face first with a wet slap in the mud. Arms sprawled like a stunned animal. Gasps tore through the circle. This time no one laughed. The wiry cadet stepped in next. Faster, meaner, a clenched fist already cocked. He swung hard at her temple. She ducked under it clean. Her elbow snapped up into his ribs, short and brutal. He buckled with a choking grunt, his breath gone. One hand reached toward his chest, the other still flailing. She didn't hit him again. She just pushed. He dropped beside the first cadet, coughing hard, eyes bulging with disbelief. A few cadets in the crowd stepped back. Near the equipment shed, a staff sergeant, older, grayer, someone who should have known better, stood watching. His hand moved toward his whistle, then stopped. He glanced at the supervising sergeant, still scribbling in his notebook, then back at the circle. His hand dropped. He turned and walked toward the barracks. Later, that moment would matter. Later, it would be in the report. But right now, it just meant she was alone. The third attacker, a square-jawed kid with too much muscle and not enough control. Hesitated, then committed. He came from behind, arms wide, trying to wrap her in a bear hug. She let him. Or at least that's what it looked like. She dropped low just as his arms closed. Her knees bent, spine compressed, and then she exploded upward, throwing her hips into his center of gravity. He was off the ground before he knew it, then down, flat on his back with a thud that kicked dust into the air. He groaned, stunned, one hand reaching for the sky like it might stop spinning. That left one, the tall cadet she'd wrist-locked earlier. He didn't rush in, not now. He looked around, breathing heavy, watching his three friends writhe in the dirt. "What the hell?" he muttered. "How'd she?" Then he saw her watching him. Not angry, not smug, just waiting. That seemed to break something in him. He yelled and charged. She didn't sidestep this one. She met him. His arm came up to swing, but her hand shot forward first, caught his forearm, turned it, twisted inward, his momentum folded into hers. A second later, he was bent at the waist, his shoulder locked, his hand wrenched up between his shoulder blades. "Stop!" he shouted. She held. Every eye in the yard was on her now. Even the instructors near the main path had gone quiet. Mud streaked her sleeves. Blood trickled from one of the scrapes on her knuckles. Her chest rose and fell with effort, but not exhaustion. Precision had taken effort, not violence. She hadn't hit anyone in the face, hadn't drawn blood, just shut them down, clean, controlled, disciplined. She released the cadet's arm and stepped back. He stumbled forward and fell to his knees, panting. The woman looked around the circle. No one moved, no one spoke. Her voice was quiet. "Enough!" And this time no one laughed. The silence that followed was heavy. Not the silence of confusion, but recognition. Like a room finally realizing the rules had never been what they thought they were. One cadet near the back, a prior service Marine who'd seen real operators work, put the pieces together first. The way she'd moved, the economy of motion, the joint locks executed with surgical precision. He'd seen that before in Pendleton, in instructors who never raised their voices because they didn't need to. "Oh, hell," he breathed. "She's not a contractor, she's..." But he didn't finish because now everyone was staring at something they couldn't quite name. The crowd that had gathered out of mockery was now staring at something else entirely. Not a civilian, not a contractor, something they didn't understand. She didn't say another word, just reached down, adjusted the wrist of her glove, and waited. Because now they were the ones uncertain. And the woman standing in the middle of the mud-streaked drill yard? She hadn't come here to prove herself, but she'd just done it anyway. The silence held for almost a full 10 seconds. No one moved, no one dared break it. The 4 cadets who had mocked her were still on the ground, mud-streaked, breathless, stunned into silence. Around them, the rest of the training yard stood frozen, and then a sharp voice cut through the stillness. "What the hell is going on over here?" It was Lieutenant Colonel Dempsey, towering, broad-shouldered, the kind of senior officer whose voice carried more weight than his rank alone. He walked in with purpose, flanked by 2 junior staff, his eyes scanning the crowd. One look at the disheveled cadets, the half-circle of onlookers, and the woman standing in the middle told him everything and nothing. "Who started this?" he barked. All 4 cadets pointed at once. "She attacked us. We were just talking. She overreacted. We didn't even touch her." The lies tumbled over each other. Dempsey's brow creased. Then he turned to the woman. She didn't defend herself, didn't say a word. She just stood there, mud on her sleeves, one palm still scraped raw, her expression unreadable. His gaze sharpened. Something about her stance caught his eye. Not aggressive, but perfectly squared, back straight, chin steady, boots planted shoulder-width apart like she belonged there more than any of them. "Who are you?" he asked slowly. She reached into the inside of her jacket and withdrew a folded, laminated contractor pass, handed it over without a word. He glanced down. "Assigned logistics consultant," he read aloud. Then, more to himself, "referred by joint command." He trailed off. His eyes moved to her wrist, just as she reached up to wipe a streak of mud from her cheek. That's when he saw it. A small, inked outline just beneath the cuff of her sleeve. It wasn't prominent, wasn't flashy, but it was unmistakable. A gold trident, partially faded but intact. His demeanor shifted. He looked at her again, properly this time. The way she carried herself. The way she'd stood there without raising her voice or throwing a punch she didn't need. "Wait," he said slowly. "What's your name?" Her voice came soft, but clear. "Lieutenant Commander Arden Holt." It dropped like a weight in the space between them. A few of the cadets sucked in quiet breaths. One of the instructors in the back straightened, as if recognizing the name. Dempsey blinked once, clearly recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the situation. "I've read your file," he said quietly. "You're..." She gave a small nod. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He turned to the cadets, his face harder than steel. "You 4 just assaulted a Navy SEAL combat veteran, one with more time in hostile fire zones than all of you combined have in this academy. What do you have to say for yourselves?" The cadets looked down. One shook his head slowly, eyes burning with shame. "She didn't even fight back at first," one mumbled. "She didn't have to," another whispered. Dempsey turned to her again. "You could have broken bones," she answered calmly. "Didn't need to." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Deeply. It wasn't just respect. It was understanding. "Thank you, Commander," he said quietly. She didn't reply, but in that moment, everyone on that drill yard understood who she was and who she wasn't. She wasn't a civilian. She wasn't a contractor. She was a Navy SEAL. And they had just shoved her into the dirt. Lieutenant Colonel Dempsey didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice, when he turned back to face the yard, was calm, controlled. But every syllable landed like a gavel strike. "This woman isn't logistics," he said, eyes scanning the crowd. She's Lieutenant Commander Arden Holt, retired Navy SEAL, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, dozens of classified deployments. She has bled for this flag longer than any of you have worn a uniform. The word spread through the yard like a fuse. Cadets turning to each other in stunned silence, whispers breaking out in shocked clusters. Arden didn't move. She didn't flinch at the sound of her own name. She just stood still, hands folded loosely at her waist, her expression unreadable. She'd been through worse than this, much worse, but for the 4 who had shoved her, who had laughed, mocked, grabbed, and swung, this wasn't just embarrassment now. It was institutional humiliation. The stocky one, still hunched slightly from where she'd taken him to the ground, lowered his gaze and whispered, "Ma'am, I didn't know." Dempsey didn't let it slide. "You didn't know," he said sharply, "because you assumed. You saw someone quiet, someone older, someone not wearing a combat tab or carrying a weapon, and instead of showing discipline, you showed off." No one spoke. The wiry cadet swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. We thought she was just a contractor." Dempsey turned on him. "You think a uniform determines worth? You think a patch makes you untouchable? She's seen more in a year than you'll see in a decade. And she didn't need to lift a weapon to teach you a lesson." He turned to Arden again. "Commander Holt, do you want to press charges?" She met his eyes. "No." He waited, surprised. "No?" She shook her head. "They've already learned more from this than any punishment could teach them." Her voice was steady. Not forgiving, just finished. She didn't need to rub it in. She didn't need them dragged off in cuffs. Because she wasn't the one buried in shame now. Dempsey gave a small nod. Understood. He faced the cadets once more. "You 4 will report to your commanding officers for immediate disciplinary review. You'll scrub every inch of this yard before sunset. And tomorrow morning, you'll be front and center at the honor board to explain what happened, exactly as it happened." They nodded quickly, shame flooding their faces. Arden didn't look at them. She didn't need to. The rest of the crowd had begun to scatter, murmurs echoing as the reality of what they'd witnessed sank in. Some avoided her eyes, others stared with newfound respect. Respect not earned through boasting or brute force, but through restraint, skill, and quiet authority. She adjusted her sleeve, covering the trident tattoo once more, and finally moved, brushing mud from her fatigues with a calm, methodical motion. Dempsey watched her a moment longer, then said quietly, "We're lucky to have you here." She didn't respond. Didn't need to, because in this place, on this day, it was no longer a question of who she was. It was a reminder of what kind of silence should never be underestimated. Most of the cadets had already dispersed, ordered off the yard to clean their gear, report to instructors, or simply walk off the shame still clinging to their boots. But she remained. Lieutenant Commander Arden Holt crouched down near the center of the drill lane, not out of exhaustion, not to sulk, but to clean. She took a simple cloth from her side pouch, slowly wiped the caked mud from her boots, one stroke at a time. No rush, no anger, just the same quiet focus that had carried her through operations most of these recruits would never even hear about. Colonel Dempsey lingered nearby. He hadn't left either. He took a few steps forward, stopping just behind her. His voice was quieter now, almost respectful. "They'll never forget this lesson." She didn't look up. "Neither will I," she replied. It wasn't said with bitterness. It wasn't pride, just truth. She stood again and gave her boots a final tap against the gravel, knocking the last bits of dirt free. Her uniform was still damp, her gloves still scuffed, but there was nothing out of place in her bearing. No one would dare mistake her again. She glanced once more toward the open field, the same one where she'd been shoved, mocked, and underestimated. And now, that dirt no longer marked her failure. It marked their fall. She adjusted her sleeves, tucked her gloves neatly under her belt again, and walked off the yard without looking back. Not one cadet lifted their head. Because in the space of 10 minutes, they hadn't just seen a fight, they'd witnessed something they'd never forget. What quiet power really looked like. What would you have done if you were in her place? Do you think the cadets truly learned their lesson? Let us know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you that real respect is earned in silence, not shouted in a yard, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss what happens when the odds are flipped. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that rank isn't everything. Your next mission's already on the screen. Go watch it now. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time. Brand new story.